is Elroy, who is the CEO of the Polish-Israeli Chamber of Commerce. Being in Poland for 20 years now, he is an Israeli lawyer and entrepreneur successfully operating in the investment and real estate sectors. For years, he has been engaged in reinforcing cooperation between Poland and Israel in the field of trade and culture. Please come to the stage. And our next guest is Katharina Rokita, who is the founder and managing director at Caliber Services, CGO at Emotion, and mentor at Google Launchpad Accelerator. She has 11 years of experience working in consultancy regarding site selection projects, foreign direct investments, and business development. She supports companies in their international expansion, as well as in financing and innovation strategies. Can I invite you to the stage? We have decided to hold a Q&A session at the end of the panel, so there will be an opportunity for our audience to ask some questions at the end. So, my first question is about the things that pandemic changed. The coronavirus pandemic has turned everything upside down. So could you tell me, how to be successful in post-pandemic business? What are the current trends, and how to use them? Let's start with Katharina.
First, it's a pleasure being here. So also maybe a little bit about my background. I'm half German, half Polish. So I lived in Berlin the last 8 years. Just moved to Poland, and what was a direct effect for me on pandemic? I switched to M&As. So one of the things I would do. But I did is like from being more of VC focus, I switched to M&A, where I saw that it's much easier for startups to really find direct connection with the corporate world, where they could directly upsell and would feel more security sometimes with a VC that stopped investing for a while based off the pandemic or even looking for alternatives. When it comes to what I'm looking at, what really is for me important looking at startups who are looking to invest, is at the moment first of all, product diversification, so having more than one business line. Then it's certainly switching of a focus from more B2C actually to B2B, which we see as an area, if there is a crisis in pandemic, which is much more secure of going forward from a perspective. What I also like is having automated sales where possible, even in B2B, so working in a SaaS model. What I also see as much secure and faster. Then certainly, but I will maybe leave the voice to someone else, so I'm not pushing everything out, so we have a discussion. Let's comment.
You're doing great. So first, thank you very much for having me and for the invitation and for assembling this great panel. So you introduced me, I have nothing to add more. We were very active in Poland. It's a market that a lot of the Israeli startups and actually also financial institutions are looking towards in terms of collaboration. I want to relate to one thing that you said that in me first is you mentioned it as multi-solution. I'm looking at this at the bundling. So if a company is doing remittance and they can add a layer of insurance to it, or a layer of trading or wealth management. So trying to combine several value propositions into one is something that we see happening more and more locally, globally. And startups are start to understand, okay, once we have the end client, we need to expand the value proposition we're working with. It can be through M&As, it can be through collaboration with third parties, or implementation in financial institutions that have a wider range of services than what they on their own have. So,
I would agree completely with you when you touch partnerships. Actually, the big trend is that like it's not just about growing a sales department, but growing a partnerships department. So actually using those channels to doing sales activities, to upselling, or maybe for some of the partners doing the implementation of your product, so you don't spend time. So if you have a product developed, they take over some of the supply chain, let's say, to like really on the go-to-market and entry.
Well, I would like to maybe shed some light on something we will touch, of course, the innovation and high-tech in a minute again, come to questions. But I think that generally we see a couple of influences also on trade and investment. Before I do that, I want to relate to something Rokita said at the beginning when we started this conference today, that it's true that business is being influenced usually by politics or political situations between the countries that are involved in this transaction. But sometimes business, they disregard what's happening. I can tell you that even today, that let's say diplomatic relationship between Poland and Israel are not so great, to say in a delicate word. Business is moving on as usual, so it doesn't affect anything on the business. So I think business people will share with me.
Yeah, I agree. For me, it's very funny coming from Germany to see how much people in Poland are complaining. They're complaining about
Poland it's a national sport. Come on, this is Polish people complain with all the love I have for them. I'm also Polish. You said that I'm
half
Polish citizen.
Unfortunately, it can be true.
But yes, so business sometimes pushes ahead of politics or diplomatic relationship. When they want to start, they simply start. They don't wait for anyone. And sometimes they also disregard what's happening in the area. Of course, if there is a huge crisis or something that really affects the business, it means that there are some laws, etc., then they are affected. But overall, diplomatics is, let's say, one level above them, and they just continue the business as normal. That's what we feel right now between Poland and Israel. Because I don't feel anything, either in the chamber or the business I'm running, or I know from friends and other investors, there's zero influence right now. But maybe, of course, just to give a couple of trends or considerations, let's say, that the pandemic did create, and I share your view that you should bring more value to the end customer and try to produce more into simple. So for sure, this is the joint ventures and corporations. This is one thing. Another thing, let's say, for sure, the working remotely is something that is done internally, but also bilaterally and multilaterally. So people are starting to be more easy with operating and outsourcing, etc. So it becomes more and more popular. It was before, of course, but I think it's even expanding.
I agree here that actually I would not say that like COVID has been something that international business has been going back. I think even has been going forward. So for example, I'm doing M&As without meeting the founders. So we can do deals even faster. So suddenly the due diligence process, the fastest I've done, took us 3 weeks. And normally it takes months. And suddenly things can be more effective. And that's something impressive, like, when we would start, oh my God, now like everything will take longer, we have to stop, and actually that was not the case.
I want to differentiate a little bit the conversation, because we're talking on one end, what are the trends, so working remotely, for example, but how do we translate it into opportunities? So everybody working remotely, what do we as a startup, as a fintech, I'm focusing on fintech, okay? So how does a fintech startup can utilize that? So if we're looking at remote engagement, so how can a bank or financial institutions engage better with their end clients, sell more, customer engagement? Now, it's not that they didn't need it before, now it's much more relevant because people want less to go to the branches. You know that?
There are no branches to go to. They're closing them one by one.
Or there's no supply chain, so Black Friday is not happening in most of the e-commerce startups, not because they don't have the money or people don't want to buy, but just to say, why should I sell something for less money if by the supply chain I don't have the product?
we had a really interesting project with an Israeli company providing this remote engagement for companies. So they had a project with Fold, and they tried to sell. This was in the midst of the pandemic. Everybody stayed at home, and they sold 80% of all their stock things, all the stock they had for this, and they were amazed how much this is another revenue stream that you haven't even thought of. So it's not just about working remotely, it's how can we not only go back to where we were, but also engage in much faster client engagement and sales. That before that it was a bit, less relevant.
One more point I would like to touch remotely, if we move us to the next question. I think that also in the level of states, states realize that they should be less dependent on the imports, and also we see an effect of COVID and the rise of the transportation and the energy prices that also affect the cost of delivering goods. So not everything is high-tech. So this is also an influence, and I think that governments today encourage businesses to develop the business within the country. Especially we see it in areas of food, agri-food, agri-tech, and also in the area of pharma. People would like to have their own vaccines, their own food chains, so they are not dependent on priority that other countries may set for themselves, when delivering such goods. So that's another trend we see. But I think innovation comes here as one of the solutions. That when you don't have traditional solutions, then innovation can cover up, or people are coming with more ideas, how to be more efficient, how to save energy, how to economize things, etc. Fintech is a good example because processes are being made faster in a more secure way with less, tangible movements. And I think it's a good example. That's also one of the things you see, I think, as an effect of the COVID.
Yeah, fintech is certainly something very interesting. I'm investing on in e-commerce in Southeastern Europe and now moving a little bit to Latam. And actually, for me, e-commerce, fintech, payment gateways is for me the gold thing. Because via payment gateway, I can then upsell to the merchants everything, and I have them for this. So this is for me something I would say like my real focus is investing into payment gateways. That's where I see like a lot of growth going on because I did an upsell an e-shop, the checkout page. I can then go further and further and further, and it's just bundling the merchant to us, and then suddenly it's becoming much more e-commerce.
I think one of the things that happened. So you touched on the e-commerce side, you touched on the trading, wealth management side. A lot of money has been issued in the market, not in every market, globally. Right? In the U.S., I just came from Miami just now, and in another panel, and we talked about. There was a staggering fact, and this will blow your mind. 40% of the entire U.S. bills. Okay, so all the money in the U.S., 40% of it was printed in the last 12 to 15 months. We're talking about decades of printing money, and in the last year and a half, they printed 40% of the capital. So the money is out there, and people are using it.
This is still Trump, not Biden.
Sorry?
This is still Trump, not Biden.
Maybe it started there, but 40%, it's unbelievable. Now we see it in different markets, and people have some money they can use, and e-commerce and trading are definitely fields where they one for expense and one for investment or saving. So it's just a matter of understanding how can a startup utilize this enormous dip of money in the market right now.
A funny anecdote to this, so much money is now printed in the UK that they asked where actually the cash money is, and 1/3 of the cash was missing.
Wow.
so cash can also
sounds like
disappear.
a second wire transfer expense on the way.
Yes, but maybe going back to your question of like post-pandemic investment, what I see also, I like startup to have like better, a lot of small clients than being dependent of too big clients. So I would really look on the retention rate of clients and really would see that there's not of like 3 big players that like taking 40% of the revenue, because we know in like pandemic times it can go really fast. And then net cash run. So this is like really, really important. So like have your runway and don't calculate for 12 months, but for 10 months. And I think really look immediately, always after the first round for the next round. So this also here, coming to the Polish market where tickets are distributed, that they're way too small for startups, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you so much. You mentioned a lot of topics, but I think it's a very important discussion. And moving to the next question, especially to Mr. Sharon, but also to Mr. Knebel. what is the role of business association in building new initiatives? Can we provide some examples of success stories?
Sure. So maybe 2 words about FinTech Aviv and what we built. So FinTech, we launched it in 2014. Today is one of the largest FinTech communities globally. We have over 30,000 members. We're hosting events monthly, bi-monthly. Now we'll move to quarterly. All the events are in English, so we welcome both local, Israeli, and global partners. And it became this hub connecting multinationals and Israeli technologies, and vice versa. So if you're an Israeli startup and you want to approach the market, you'll come to our events, and we see that very often. And it's a place when you're multinational, or for example, we're working for 2 years now with the Warsaw Stock Exchange. So this is an access point for them to understand a little bit more of the market, to get some feedback from it, to get some traction, and indicate, okay, we're here, we want to present ourselves as liable partners, so start working with us. And I have a lot of success stories of startups that presented at the event and then implemented it, not necessarily in Poland, also in Poland, but it happens because this is a place where people come, and Israel has, it's unbelievable how it became this enormous fintech hub. 5% of the total investments in fintech globally Israel represents, the fintech investment in Israel represents more than 5% of the global investment in fintech. So we have over 60 unicorns in Israel. There's the amount of technology that can be sourced from Israel is massive, and it calls multinationals and investors to come see what's in it. And the role of FinTech Aviv as a hub really help in connecting all the dots together. It's crucial. You wanted to add?
Mr. Knebel, maybe you want to add something?
Yes, our role as a Chamber of Commerce has become more difficult, and we share this with all the other chambers. We have this sort of a roof organization, overall organization, that we share information and consequences of COVID. Because traditionally, Chamber of Commerce is acting mostly in 2 ways. Okay? One is providing information in order to make access to other markets easier, or people that can learn beforehand, and this is encouraging them to do business. The more you know, the less you are scared, or less barriers, let's say, emotionally you have to do business. And the other one were interactions, so conferences, delegations, etc. And this has stopped during the pandemic. And this poses a real, let's say, problem for chambers. Some people may claim that there is no alternative to personal contact, and people usually, at the end of the day, they do business with people they meet, they can shake hands. You get just the opposite example that you do. No, I'm saying so on the one hand, for the traditional markets, I think it's a big threat. And there is no really way for us to overcome this, but to wait for better times, except for, and this is partly related to what you said, Sharon, one was that we increased the amount of information which is available. So let's say if in the past it was less, now today we're trying to provide more and more information. And second is to use these online platforms and webinars and these interactions. And apparently, at the end of the day, it's easier for them. They don't need to travel halfway across the world in order to see other people. So at least the first interaction can be done online, and people are using that. And it became also more normal for them to use it. So in the past, people would maybe even treat it as a disrespect. I'm not saying in the high-tech community, but other communities, you don't want to travel, you don't want to come, you don't put enough effort in the transaction, etc. Now they accept it. And then the later stages are really meetings. Sometimes they are needed, at least not in the high-tech area. And these are happenings because I think COVID has less and less effect right now, and people are able to travel. Hopefully Israel was also luckily opened a couple of days ago for the outside world. We were quite isolated, I have to say. We as Israelis don't feel it because we can travel. Most of the countries are open, but people to come to Israel was a big hassle. It was not so easy.
I feel it right now. We have a pipeline of incoming delegations from M-Bank to Pasha Holding from all over Europe. Coming to Israel to see innovations, like they were waiting. Okay, when will you have when will you be able to come back to Israel? So right now it's gonna actually explode again.
I'm coming to. I'm coming first week of December directly. No, but it's pretty like, there was a trend. I think first there were all those online events, everybody was attending, then I hated them, I stopped.
Yeah, it was horrible.
I couldn't
We actually moved our events to be digital, fully digital. It grew the number of participants, but the event itself wasn't as, like the value you get, the interaction that you make, the relationship that you build, it's a little different.
So networking, so this is the clue. So this thinking also a big difference. What Israeli, they perfect networker. They know how to network. They think global from day one. And this is something in Poland when you see it's very difficult for Polish people to network, to go out there. Very often a Polish startup will just take a consultant from a country to take them by the hand to go and visit.
See, I had to approach you today. You didn't come to me.
But I told you directly, you can scan me, So
that was a first for me, I admit.
So, you don't give the hand anymore, so, you use LinkedIn, there's a QR code, I told them scan me so you know who I am. They'd be quite confused. But exactly, but I think association should or could be investing in digital marketplaces where each of their partners have a spot, has a place where they present them, and have some opportunities of do direct business deals where the association can also cut a part of it, also doing those B2B marketplaces where I think it's a big trend.
Okay, thank you so much. And now let's talk about the cooperation. Our Congress concerns the Polish-Israeli cooperation, and I would like to ask you, what are the possible fields for this cooperation between our countries and businesses in the innovation sector? Who would like to answer first? Okay.
Listen, it's a great question because I have a great answer. Okay, not because the question is, but generally I can tell you this is really blooming. Today I can tell you there is a trend of dozens, not today, it started even before COVID, but I think COVID accelerated it to some extent. First of all, there are dozens really, not a handful, but dozens of companies, Israeli high-tech companies in all the sectors, including fintech, but also in agri-tech, in IT, in the energy sector, etc., which are coming to Poland to benefit from the very generous NCBR grants, which is our European money, which are available for Israeli companies also here. It's available actually for Polish companies, but only what you have to do is set up a Polish subsidiary, do the project within this company, and you can benefit from something which usually is around 70, effectively they publish 80, but effectively it's around 75% non-refundable cash grant. Companies are very happy to use it. Another big factor is that Poland, to some extent, has managed to stabilize itself or have the recognition of a good, especially in IT, but also in other areas, as a good innovation it's an ecosystem. And you can not fire, exactly the opposite, hire very good HR at very competitive prices, for sure, if you compare it to Germany or to Israel. Still, it's rising all the time, it's picking up the gap, but still there is a gap.
Super skills, I would call it. I think Poland has some super skills when it comes to IT, but still they're missing the international profile, so they're only suited for the Polish market very often.
But the combination of, let's say, bringing the idea from somewhere else, not necessarily Israel, I'm giving the example because you asked about Israel, the innovation can come from any other country, but bringing the idea here and hiring Polish HR to work on it, I think it also opens up their perspective of how to look at the business. The work is being done great, and you have to know that Polish government also doesn't impose any grip on the IP of the company. So unlike Israeli, for example, Innovation Authority, you get the grant, but you don't have to pay royalties, you don't have to pay anything, and not more than that. At the end of the project, if you want to commercialize the IP from the Polish subsidiary that actually did the project, they're offering you a 5% corporate income tax, which is in the middle of Europe. It's unbelievable. So it's an offer you cannot refuse, hardly refuse. So that's a perfect example. It's a perfect example of the cooperation. I'm telling you, it's happening. I'm not aware so much of it's happening on the other side. It means the Polish innovation companies are coming to Israel. They are coming to seek for investors, usually, but not to do the development itself. I
have several companies, actually, Israeli companies, that are several Polish companies that are approaching the Israeli market. Usually it's with product that is not B2C, it's not relevant. And it is a product either in wealth management or trading or core technology where the financial institution can implement, so it is relevant. Sorry, and one of the things that I think is fundamentally different in the mentality of startups in Israel, startups in Poland. Poland by itself is a great market. If you're a startup, you can work and build your product towards the Polish market, even segment it towards this Polish market. So a lot of the startups are in Polish. They're providing, their mentality, all the team are Polish, the language of the product, everything is Polish. So for them to move outside of the region is much more complicated than an Israeli company who start from day one in the language relevant in their designated market, and then develop more and more. They can build a range of different mentalities within their team, which we see very often in Israel. So one very important part, which I'm trying very hard to promote, and we'll see how it works, but we've built several accredited fintech courses in Israel. And these are students who want to have access to global markets, they want to learn about fintech, they want to understand the opportunities, and their mindset is yet very close to what they feel and live in Israel. So we're trying to find a local partner here to build a program for MBA students or first degree, and to have this joint fintech course where they can work together on products. So you'll have entrepreneurs from both sides.
Erasmus, you said the best at European Union.
Yeah, exactly, like
That's
Erasmus.
the only thing that they did successfully is actually this Erasmus program. But you know that this NCD fund, this was based on something that Israel did 40 years ago. It's just a copy paste.
I know, but listen, for sure, yes, I'm aware of this. And I had a couple of discussions with a couple of ministers from Poland because they came before the pandemic. They used to come to Israel even twice or three times a year. Okay, for example, Minister Milevich, etc. She was a couple of times in Israel. But I can tell you that they did it much smarter at the end of the day because they copied the idea without this IP issue. That's because, and the stated policy, it's not that they forgot it. Some Israelis are coming to me and say, hey, what's wrong with the program? Where's the catch? So telling there is no catch. The stated policy of the Polish government from this perspective was to create an ecosystem of innovation in Poland. So they say just hire the people, make it happen here, and the rest is yours.
It's actually what I see a lot, like the Israeli companies doing the R&D work here. Headquarters stays in Israel with key managers, and then when the product is ready to do market release, market testing, they take the Polish population because it's much more interesting for them. And this is, I think, the good mix. And this program is also, as we discussed before, supporting all universities, schools. But there definitely, I think, there is a place for improvement. There are a lot of public schools coming up now in Poland. Or public schools in Poland, universities having EU funding to do that.
And you were very right in your comments, I understand that Poland is an interesting market it's a big enough market to do your trial or to start marketing. So it's not a small market. You do it here and you can immediately sell here.
It's not only that it's big enough, but it's very welcoming. It's very welcoming to Israel. Everything. Geographically, we're very close. There are 4 flights a day. Mentality-wise, you mentioned the political engagement and agenda. I didn't feel it in any of the, religion.
And even I compare it to Germany, Polish market is more open for tech innovation than the German market.
Is there a market that is less open than Germany?
I said it diplomatically.
It's very difficult to implement in Germany, regardless if you're outside of the market. But I think we see in Poland, the financial institutions. So just, I think 4 weeks ago, I was here with 5 Israeli companies, right? And we did this roadshow in financial institutions, and I can tell you that we have 3 or 4 POCs undergoing just from that visit. So there is a hunger for innovation, and there's this huge opportunity. All we need is, you mentioned sometimes the company takes someone to help them. It is crucial, because we had there's an incident, let's call it, about Paybox. Paybox is a really cool Israeli startup. They started in Israel, and it works. And it's actually provide great value and reduce costs. So there's a lot of room for additional technologies in Rokita. So, and Israelis are really doing that well.
One more thing to pick up on what you said. There's another advantage that Poland has, and Israeli companies are using it recently. And Poland has a lot of accredited labs, very good laboratories. They were also built, by the way, I think 5 or 10 years ago using grant money. It's a state-of-the-art laboratory in many areas. So not of food, electricity, aviation, agri, whatever almost field you can think about. Poland has more than 1,500 accredited labs. And the labs are working much cheaper than at least what Israelis are used to in Israel. And in some cases, for example, in Israel there are barriers to do it. For example, in the cannabis area, it's very difficult to import the substance, for example, from US to Israel. Poland, it's not a problem to do it. So they import it here, they do the tests here, and they're using the results of the test. And still, you know, between the cost here and the cost in Israel, there is a huge difference, sometimes up to 100%. And this is also a trend which is happening right now. You know.
Poland is situated logistically and perfect for being a logistic hub then in the future, so for pharma, that's how I would see it. But then also it's a step to open to all of Central, Eastern Europe and Southeastern Europe. So our companies now that we acquire, most of them acquisition I do is Kosovo, Macedonia, Albania, Romania, like Croatia, and then we look for developers in Albania and Kosovo.
And it's amazing. I've been to Kosovo just recently,
yes, you see Kosovo is like
it's blooming. It's nice. You still walk into a store and you have like 10 different POS, one for each market.
And I do with Asseco, like we like trying to like put them together. But yes, it's funny. Or you know, Macedonia doesn't have Uber or no McDonald's, so you know you still can feel it. No, what are you doing?
I don't think it's a problem. They don't have
McDonald's. No, it's not a problem.
Uber,
it's just like you know, you see, different markets. Yeah, you know, it's like educating the market, but you can you can go over some steps. You can do some steps faster.
You have already started a discussion about the topic that I wanted to ask you, because I wanted to ask, how does the Polish market look like from the point of view of international businesses? What do you think? What are the advantages and what are maybe the potential threats? Maybe we'll start with Mrs. Rokita.
So for me, like moving now also from Germany to Poland, it's pretty interesting seeing there's more of gray zones. So legal legislation that are missing, policies. So some startups would like just take, for example, the e-scooters you have on the streets, Lion and Tier and all of those. So in Poland, they started 1 year before they were able to enter the German market. Because legislation-wise, the German couldn't figure out, is it a car, electric vehicle, is it a bicycle, what should they be driving? And in Poland, they just went on the market. And so they just tested the product completely on the market. So you can say here the business is still that more cowboy style, you can do it faster, you have an idea, go forward. In Germany, they will write a strategy for 1 year, but after this, they will get a higher amount of money to do it. So in Poland, you have an idea, okay, just do MVP, test it. In Germany, it would be differently, like write a great strategy and you would then get 25 million for the PowerPoint. In Poland, it's the other way around. Make something small that is half working, go on the market, and then we see if we give you more.
We see also in cloud technology adoption. Okay? So the regulator here is, cloud actually is I'd say starting in the past 3 years. Okay? In Poland, most of the financial institutions are still interested in on-prem, but because they just don't know exactly what the regulator wants from them in terms of cloud adoption. But it seems that the regulator is coming to like aligning, saying, okay, these are the ground, the fundamentals that you need to be working on, and let's go. Because what I'm trying to say is that the time frame for legislation from the regulatory standpoint, and I really like the Polish regulator. I think they're doing a great job in providing transparency to the market and exactly how things work. You know, they each have their own issue, and you know they probably see some others might complain, but In terms of when I'm looking at it at a global perspective, I think they're doing a very good job in trying to mitigate the gap between the market trends and the regulatory that is required. That's another very important.
For the cloud, they created some kind of sandbox.
Yeah. There's a lot of we're part of a project of a sandbox. So one particular sandbox that will be interacting with all the banks, like PICC is doing it with in e-com and in payments. I think it's magnificent to have one centralized let's say platform for testing, for payment, other things. It is very beneficial to the market.
I don't know, from a VC perspective, certainly tickets are small tickets I hear, and VCs, even if I'm friend with all the VCs, starting from Knebel, that I respect a lot and so on, but like, it's very secure investment. They don't take risk. Yeah. So it's very secure. It's like almost break-even companies they invest in that are stable. Like, that's not startup investment for me. And the government from this side is doing a great job, because only those VC funds that have government funding do this high-risk investment.
They get the funds for it.
Yes.
I wanted to add also that looking from outside, I think I'm a big fan of the Polish economy, and I think that Poland is doing a great job also in attracting foreign investors. And I think generally, if you look maybe again not only from high-tech perspective, so Poland for outsiders looks first of all, it's a big market. It's a market that has very good economic results, let's say, for the last 15 or 20 years, and steady. And let's ignore the inflation, which is now rising a little bit in Poland, but generally it's like that. It has a very good and solid legal system and the banking system, which are very important for businesses. So nothing disappears, everything is registered. It has a lot of bureaucracy, correct, maybe too much, but the advantage of bureaucracy is sometimes that if you play by the rules, if you learn, and if you hire somebody to help you with that, you're a king or a queen, whatever you want to choose to be. But it's not a problem to manage. If you start manipulating the bureaucracy, then you have problems. But usually it is like that. So I would say that this is the big advantages of the market. And again, the very good reputation of the HR in Poland in all sectors. Okay? So it's also in real estate, in construction, not only dealing with high-tech. And also as a blue collars, workers in industry, etc. So all very good reputation. It comes at a very competitive price. Add to this, again, the availability of grants for high-tech, for industry, for traditional industry, for setting up facilities. All of Europe is producing today in Poland. So even, German companies like Mercedes-Benz, I think they have the
supply chain, tier supplier, tier
yeah. Amazing.
And even, with the COVID, and you see that some companies, German, will say, okay, let's even build a small factory then in Poland, a new one, which is even more expensive, but just to secure the supply chain, just in case. And they're actually, coming back and building like small, dedicated factories.
I say that the threats, maybe if you look, it's not all positive, okay. So, but threats can be more related. Let's say that the situation between Poland and EU. Sometimes there are tensions, and this causes some tension with investors. And also the inflation, I would say, that is rising and a little bit, above the expectations. And, I don't know how Poland will treat it. It's not easy to manage, but this is, if you're asking for threats, that's what I see as the major threats. Let's say, the eyes of foreign investors.
I want to add one opportunity here. Poland has what's the name of the coin? Zlotys. So it is. So people need to change that. Either they shop outside, so euros or dollars, or if you're a startup, so you need to pay your salaries in zlotys, but you pay your suppliers and getting maybe from your clients in other currencies. So anything in hedging in currency is huge and can be huge here, because almost any company that works in Poland and works globally needs to do hedging. It is crucial. So it's a huge opportunity. And it's very similar also in Israel. So it's very easy to find the technologies that are being used in Israel and mimic them here, and vice versa.
For me, one scary thing that I see is the really growing salaries in Poland. And actually, like, you know, the German government, German companies are much more conscious of it and controlling it in somehow, and there's some responsibility in it. In Poland, really, there's no responsibility for this. In Germany, a worker that will change job just because of 50 euro salary, 100 euro would never be taken. This jumping is really not accurate, and here people really change jobs.
Same in Israel, by the way.
It's like, it's horrible. Like, what is the reality? And the market is growing so fast that actually, I've read an article that actually now, like the salary range between Warsaw and Berlin, Warsaw has higher salaries in some industries as Berlin.
But in Berlin, Germany in general,
Berlin is not
social,
Germany.
okay, yeah, but in terms of social benefit and the way they see the employees, it's completely different than almost anywhere in the world. Like, the level of protection you have on an employee is something that I haven't seen in any other one.
Yeah, but it's also unattractive, then maybe it's like a plus and a minus. But this is something I just see that, you know, those salaries going up so high in Warsaw. Okay, Warsaw is also an iceberg, and, you know, going outside of Poland, everything is like 30-40% less valued, so specific. But I see that some regulation here in the salary quotas should be taking place, because you have the young generation just coming to the market, and, you know, what do you do if, you know, suddenly this young person comes in, have salary expectations are quite high and accurate to like market standards, but the employees you have with you like have 30% less and much more years of experience, and you as a company, you really riddling now of how you have it. And Polish companies and even big companies are having big issue with this. They can't hold young employees longer than 1 year, or it's really hard for them.
We talked about having local employees because different benefits and grants, but the HR landscape in Israel is unbelievable. It's very hard to find employees. And the salaries are very high, and the requirements are getting lower and lower because you don't have a lot of people in the market, and everybody wants to get the best. So you have there was a really cool campaign. So all the startups, all the high-tech companies are doing these billboards and come work with us, and we're very cool and trendy. So we had one company, AMPM, which is a chain, it's like Zavka, okay? And they did nicer? It doesn't matter, but the concept is just so people understand.
Let's say nicer.
So they had a very similar campaign to a startup company. So they invite people in English, which is not, it's not the audience, right? So they had a campaign like a high-tech company. So they said we might not be in high-tech, but people come to us when they're high. All kinds of really cool stuff. So and the market has a lot of opportunities in terms of HR, and this was a side note, but the high-tech companies are looking externally in Poland, in Ukraine, in different, actually, especially in the CE, for additional employees. So it might have an effect of also raising the salary here.
Not only Israelis are creating the demand, you know what I'm saying? So they are part. But many companies globally are looking for HR in all areas. So it's only natural when there is big demand, and the other countries also salaries are higher. People are expecting more, being paid more. They're jumping from one job to the other, correct? They don't want to be employed on an employment contract. They want to have like a self-employed or outsourcing contract.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. Like what I see that a lot of startups, bigger companies, they stopped employing Polish people. Just they started even having like HR done from the UK or from Germany, and they're trying to attract Polish people back to Poland because they prefer working with those foreigners. They have those global aspects that Polish people are missing, and they will be more loyal to the company. And I see this in a lot of VC funds, even like Polish VC funds starting to have like HR people just to recruit for their startups in London, in different cities, to just attract those people back because they say this is more valuable person.
It's funny because it's moved, right? In the past, the VC was, okay, when I need to raise capital, I'll talk to my VC who will help. But a lot of VCs are helping in HR. It's unbelievable. Moving from one company to another, if winding up a company, then you spread all the employees in different companies. It happens often, so it's a great source. So it actually became when you're targeting a VC, you actually want to understand, will he be able to help me in raising not only capital, but also HR?
Very valid point. Very valid point. Like even if we do M&As, it's certainly we want software, but we want actually the founders to stay with us. So we do M&A and we tell the founders that like, you have to, but we bound them to them on earnouts anyway for the next 5-6 years, or 7 or 8. But actually we want the people, we want the right minds to stay.
Deal with the
us.
devil. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for this interesting discussion. That's all from me, but I would like to give the floor to our audience. So we can move to Q&A session. Is there somebody that wants to ask a question to our guests? Please raise your hand. Okay, please.
Hello, my name is Christian Laufs from the Junge Union in Germany, and my question is for financial markets when it comes to Series C or Series D investments. So when startups need a lot amount of money, because I heard often that in Germany it's very hard to find investment options that are open to invest such a lot of money, and I'm worried about that companies like CureVac are doing their IPOs in America, or like Lilium, who do a SPAC merger in America. And yes, maybe you can tell me something about that.
I have a lot. So.
Yeah, go ahead, because I could just like confirm some Polish companies doing this. And
You touched on several points. Okay. And they each have different aspects. First, is there enough available capital for C round and D round in Germany? Then breaking it to what about the capital markets? So how do we attract, and we are sitting in the Warsaw Stock Exchange, it's a very relevant conversation, because every stock exchange wants to have both local companies come to raise capital and work from them. And attract the, let's say, surrounding area startups to come there, to come over and raise capital there. They're doing a lot of effort in that. Nasdaq doesn't have to do a lot of effort, right? It's something that calls, the U.S. industry is big and interesting enough on its own, but we see a lot of work from the different stock exchanges here in Budapest, in other markets that are trying to attract more, and they are actually reducing a lot of the entry levels for companies. So you'll see companies in a much earlier stage going towards, you mentioned IDO, SPAC, direct listing, depends on the market, and each stock exchange works differently. But I think it's not about, combining what we talked about here, there's several trends that you need to understand that really complete this scenario. There's a lot of capital now in the market because the government issued a lot of money, and they will get it back in taxes and social security, social benefit, etc. Investors are looking for opportunities that have grown from the pandemic. So and I'd love to hear from you. What do you think of that? So a lot of VCs kind of shifted their model. They understood, like businesses, that had to make the shift and be more relevant and tangible to post-pandemic business. Also, VCs have made that shift, and a startup that won't make this transition will have a hard time finding capital. So I think these two or three together, there's a lot of capital in the market. If you can't succeed in raising capital, maybe try a different market, because maybe your product is relevant in a different market where the VCs will be more attractive for VCs. And B, from an earlier stage, you can definitely approach examining the public markets today.
I would say there is certainly enough capital, so even like you say, the market is spoiled in Poland with capital. We have a lot of small mushrooms, like said, and so in the forest, we're just waiting for the heavy rain right now, and we think that like next year everybody's saying this heavy rain will come for the next round, so like under the leaves you see a lot of small mushrooms being there. But yes, like to the big rounds, impossible in Poland, like that's honest. And you have companies as books, you know, they're preparing for it, not like the US, it's clear. So it certainly happened, but as you know said, like there's enough market money out there in the market. It's just maybe finding the right partners, looking for the consultants, going out there, networking in associations. It's not being so close and you know waiting that they will come to you. So this is certainly a sign that you know go out there and try other markets, look around. Again, it might take you 5 years, but you know keep on there. There's somebody there who's interested in it. So.
I think less than 5 years. Don't get his wind.
Okay.
We
It takes some time. Like, and a lot of founders think like, oh, 1 year and I did, and you know, they have just like 5 pitches, 5 VC meetings. Oh, it doesn't work out. And it's like, hey, that's not enough.
Yeah, but really, public market is something that is super interesting right now. If in the past companies were aiming to stay private, look at Spotify. Okay, they're still private. A lot of the large companies didn't want to go public. They didn't want the exposure. They didn't understand why they need it. Right now, the market value is, I don't know if there's a bubble or not, but the valuation of companies is staggering, and it's both for private and public, and definitely with the SPAC phenomena, which we won't get into, but in SPAC you can actually build a higher value company going to the market. So investors, be aware, that's one thing to say, and startups, start working. Just start doing the legwork. The statistics is in your favor. Instead of having an investor in 1 in every 300 meetings, most likely you'll have 1 in 100. So it's just a matter of doing the legwork.
Okay, do we have a next question? Yes, please.
Henrik Jensen, also from the Youth Union out of Germany. I want to tackle the topic of inflation with my question. We see really high inflation in the European Union, and the ECB decided not to increase the sin. I don't know the English word right now. Sorry, and because of the corona pandemic, the debt of the Southern Europe states, and also it seems like in Poland inflation is a problem. The question going into my mind was, when we have now this difference and money gets less and less value over long term, it's a problem for companies, of course, but also maybe on the employee side, that you see that you get less and less for your money, and this could be problematic, but not only on the political side, because you're more open to populist ideas, but could this also be from the employee side a thought, a problem for the economics, that people also here in Poland start to want much more higher loans, and you have a higher fluctuation, much more higher fluctuation, and this could be also a big problem. Thank you.
I'm not an expert on inflation, but globally we can see that everything is becoming more expensive. Okay, everything from the grocery to cars to the whole thing become construction costs. Everything is becoming more expensive. This is correct. On the other hand, as you said, there's more and more money available on the market, which is on the one hand contributing to the acceleration of the inflation, because it will also pick up on the prices. And I think there is no specific answer for that. For sure, the higher salaries will allow people to purchase more, and they will push for more because it's becoming more expensive for them. But I think generally for Polish market, people in the past, at least from my experience, except for certain sectors, would not be in a hurry to take a loan. Okay? They would like to be financed by their own resources or maybe to do some partnerships, etc. And I think that opening up part of it is the opening up of the banking system to everyone, also due to fintech. And people are realizing the power how they can leverage their own resources using some banking loans. Especially, at least at the euro level, the interest is still very low. Polish market is different because it's quite high interest compared to other markets. But the Polish zloty is strong. So I think it's a tendency in the population just to try to leverage themselves a bit. I'm not sure what was exactly the question, but it's true that I feel it, and I know from the statistics that Polish people tend to take more loans, partly for their own needs and partly for establishing new businesses.
So, like, what I could say, we certainly as a company, it's a big company, as Secretary of Eastern Europe, we're just buying. Because that's a good market opportunity. It's a scary trend from a consumer part. I see the big trend in buy now, pay later, e-commerce, that will be automatically added to every e-commerce site in the next future, which is quite scary for me. And younger people love spending. Maybe I'm not young enough anymore, but younger people love just like spending already the money, and it's great, but it's super scary. Maybe it's my German part in me where I like to have savings, but Polish population don't have savings, where Germany 60%. They do? Okay.
One thing that we have in Israel, we call it part of Polish mentality, is that even young people in Poland, first of all, they run and they buy an apartment. Even students, they have less for beer and they will buy an apartment. Correct? So they will at least try to buy an apartment, even cheap or something not expensive, and then will gradually. In the States, for example, people will take the first $100,000 to $200,000 they can get, and they will put it in a good university to study and to build their future. Poland is different. They will automatically go and buy an apartment, first of all, to have a solid investment. Partly by leveraging by loans somehow they can repay it. But I think Polish people are still very prudent and quite conservative if you compare them to other markets.
Like Germany, young people would never buy an apartment. They would rather save for worse time, and when they have like 70% of the apartment, then they would buy the apartment.
Yeah, but it's completely different mentality.
Yeah.
Going back to your question about inflation, I'll give my 2 cents. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but money will flow up. All the money that is in the market will flow up to the top percentage of people who owns already most of the capital, and it will create, not only in Poland, globally, we'll have markets in really dire situation of inflation, and it's just a matter of the main reason is that most of the people don't know what to do when they receive money. So if they get this injection from the government, they don't know how to utilize it and make it sustainable, make something out of it that will create maybe a passive sort of income. So, and they spend it on things, necessary or not, it doesn't matter, but the fact is that the money flows up. And once it gets up, it doesn't really go back down. But in this interim, the prices went up, the salaries went up, and there's gonna be a large issue. I actually came from the U.S. and a lot of investors told me, listen, we're selling properties because the inflation is gonna be coming in anywhere between a year and 3 years. It's gonna happen. So people are starting to sell and save their money because they don't know exactly what's gonna happen. That's my perspective.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers. Do we have any more questions?